Welcome to Jo Avalon's Cuppa Chats, and today I'm joined by Frances Billinghurst, who is a practitioner and initiate of traditional Wicca, and she's also an author of 3 books, an editor of a 4th, and has just published her 5th book herself. Welcome, Frances. I'm so excited to have you join me today, because it's been, we've been in contact for quite a few years, and I've sold your books for, on and off over a few years, but this is our first time we've actually face-to-face had a chat, so welcome.
Thank you, Jo. Just a correction, I've actually got 7 books under my belt. Some of them aren't widely available though, so that's okay.
Okay, so I was working off the back of your latest one. So you've got Dancing the Sacred Wheel, A Journey Through the Southern Sabbats, which was my first introduction to you. Sorry, this is probably going to be back to front, but this is the first one. And this is amazing because this is written for the Southern Hemisphere. So anyone who's wanting to get into witchcraft or Wicca in particular, this is how we work here in the Southern Hemisphere, right?
Yep.
Then the second one was your In Her Sacred Name, Writings on the Goddess.
Yes, that's correct.
And then the edited one was Call of the God, an anthology exploring the divine masculine within modern paganism. Yep. And then this little baby here, a little book of Wicca. So it's an introduction for the Southern Hemisphere. Encountering the Dark Goddess.
That was officially released, where are we, on the 26th of March, and now it's available worldwide. So it's also my first book through a publisher.
That's right, yes, because of course you self-published prior to that, and now through Moon Books. That one's through Moon Books, isn't it?
Moon Books. And my next one, Contemporary Witchcraft.
Yes.
It's going to be officially released in August.
Oh.
And so it's still got a little way to go, but you can pre-order or through yourself, Jo. I can. The copies are available largely within Australia, and the other book that sort of slips through the gaps, because I've sort of pulled it back because some of the information is actually included in that, is called The Witch Circle, which is basically one of the training courses that I do, or the outer court work that I do for the Temple of the Dark Moon. I'd actually put the notes into a book format, as opposed to forever photocopying the pages. And I like books, as you can tell, and it looks good on the bookshelf. But a couple of the lectures are actually included in this. So I've pulled it because when I get a few spare moments, I'm going to sort of like rehash some of that information as well, and making it so probably a little bit more accessible. I said it's outer court material.
What does that mean? Out of court. What does that mean?
Okay, within my tradition in particular, how I run my coven is that we sort of had, there's sort of multiple layers to it. Have sort of like an outer, some people call the outer court, sort of an introduction to people who are curious, because I have more of a traditional background and lineage running through my coven and my teachings, and which can be a little bit confusing or misinterpreted by what's out there these days depicted as Wicca or witchcraft. Right. So I had the first sort of layer as sort of like an introduction, getting people introduced to sort of like what it means to work with other people, sort of instructing them on some of the key concepts that are found within sort of a more traditional form or contemporary form of witchcraft, which may or may not be readily available within the eclectic or magic that's out there being practiced today.
Yeah.
And so that's usually how I do it, either a 5 or a 6-part course of lectures. And then there's the next step for those who say, yep, this is for me. Then there's sort of like another level that sort of the material there is a little bit more in depth, as getting the people probably in the right, we call it an egregore, the right sort of spiritual consciousness or mindset moving in, because how I view my form of witchcraft is that it's more along the lines of sort of a priesthood. So getting initiation into sort of like, I don't know whether you call it like holy orders or something like that.
Yep.
But it's, to some people, it's completely different to what's projected or perceived out in the wider community, which is probably more neo-pagan based.
And solitary too, and solitary, because there's a lot of emphasis on solitary paganism in general, because that traditional kind of coven work, whether it's Wiccan or otherwise, isn't as widely available now, because I guess we've got the internet, so anybody can look at anything, right?
Yeah. And in all honesty, anybody, even in initiates, are actually solitaries in their own right, because you have to do, you are expected to do your own work as well.
True.
And when we get together, yes, we have certain gods and certain practices and rites and things are done a certain way, but when you're in your own space, you can do whatever you want, basically. So you are, by definition, a solitary, but you're also, if you're an initiate, you're also working with a group of like-minded people, and I think that's the more important thing. There's so much available these days, so much that has sort of been described or perceived as Wicca or traditional witchcraft or contemporary witchcraft. There's so many different labels these days, people get confused, that people honestly don't really understand that within sort of a more traditional form of witchcraft, and by that I mean something that can be traced back to Gerald Gardner, there are certain ways and thought practices and processes in how we see things that's a little bit different. It's not elitist, it's just doing things a bit differently. And so this is why I have these different layers, in that sort of bringing the people in who might be interested in, say, initiation or into the sort of priesthood, but not really understanding or having preconceived ideas, that when they take that first step in, say, into the outer court, which is the witch's circle, then they might realize that, oh, this is not what I thought it would be, I'm not interested. Or people might think, oh, this is definitely not what I thought it would be, so it's something more. So just giving people more of an opportunity and understanding.
Yes, so that when you form that tighter group, it's not disturbed by those misconceptions and comings and goings, because things haven't quite been what they thought. Yeah.
And as you said earlier, these days it's probably more readily available to be a solitary, where people are picking up their information could also be from other solitary practitioners, where they get that information. If you go back, who knows really? And it's not saying that my way is the right way and the only way, it's just we have different interpretations and different ways of doing things. Like some of the observances I've noticed in probably the last 10 years, especially with the increase in social media, a lot more has been placed on sort of the aesthetics, beautiful altars. I mean, I love beautiful altars as well, but there's a lot of show and tell. And it's like, especially like, here's my spell, here's my altar, here's this. And it's just, within my tradition, your altar is your sort of your power center. So it's very personal, and especially within a coven, it's very important, and you don't disclose that. Any photos that I have of my altar is usually after or before an event, so it's the bare minimum. There's usually stuff that's added or taken away from it, or it's stripped right back to its bare minimum, or it's set up purposely for a display. It's not a working altar, not a working container of energy. And people, especially spell work, it's like, I'm sitting there going, oh my God. One of the basic rules that I was taught when it came to spell work is, to be able to dare to know to keep silent, and you don't sit there and expose everything.
You don't sit there and gab about what you're working on.
Definitely not.
No, that's right, because it would diminish or dilute the power of and distract the power of what you're working with as well.
Exactly, the whole container of it. So and also it sort of can bring in that doubt. If you get like a doubting Thomas coming in saying, oh, you used the wrong phase of the moon, or you used the wrong crystal or herb or something, and then you start adding to that doubt, and then that distracts from the actual magical workings. But I mean, I have to learn to I'm just trying to think, as I said earlier, walk away from the computer at times. and this is part of the journey too, is to learn by your experiences, by your mistakes, by what doesn't work. This is all the path of the witch of working magic.
It is, isn't it? It's experiential. It's not just something that happens in your head.
Oh, definitely not.
And So if say, for example, someone came to me and said, I'm really interested in learning about traditional magic or traditional witchcraft, for example, where do I start? Which of your books would you suggest that I start, or like I point them to straight away?
Good question, because one of the books I'm forever writing, number of years ago, before social media, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I'd done a correspondence course before people went online and did witch schools and things like that.
Oh.
And that's one of my next projects, is to actually put that into like a complete workbook. Yes, sort of counteract the fact that there's still not a lot of, 21st century, there's still not a lot of material available for the Southern Hemisphere about the Southern Hemisphere.
Yep.
And that's probably my big thing, because that was what my first book was essentially all about. But when it comes to, for a newbie or a seeker, depending on first what their understanding is of Wicca, contemporary witchcraft, this is why I wrote a little book of Wicca.
Yeah.
Which actually, yes, it's just a short little book. It sort of gives an overall of a lot of the basic belief systems, the ethics, the philosophies, more so in modern day. Well, I call it contemporary witchcraft. So it's not. I suppose I have sort of included a little bit of what's called Wicca these days, in that it talks about the seasons and the Sabbaths and why we celebrate them. It talks about the moon, why the moon is important. It talks about, it includes why there is a dual deity, a god and a goddess.
Yeah.
And that is the underlining pin in my tradition and in a lot of initiatory witchcraft, is that we do have a god and a goddess. Is this polarity, this balance of masculine and feminine energies. And
equality too, not one is dependent on the other or above the other. That's, in that little chapter that I was reading again last night, was that, you introduce the goddess and she is equal to and complementary, I can't remember the exact word, but equal to, that's what stood out to me, to the god. And then exactly the same phrasing when you introduced the god, you know, so it was, not one was above the other, it was definitely equal.
In a more probably contemporary witchcraft coven, the goddess is more supreme, so to speak, but it doesn't diminish in any way, because we are technically a fertility cult. It doesn't diminish in any way the importance of the god.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I think I'm just making assumptions, but it appears that a lot of people who come to sort of paganism or Wicca or contemporary witchcraft often do so from, say, a Christian background, or a background of a religious persuasion where there's been like a dominant god. And this sort of leads through to the sort of rejection or the misunderstanding of the divine masculine, which is one of the reasons why I wrote Call of the God. Was sort of like the god within paganism in general wasn't being honoured or even talked about in the way that the goddess was, which, being female, I love the fact that there's lots of goddess information out there, but it's almost been done so to the script, what's the word, detriment of the god. And within my tradition, the two are necessary and equal. It's a bit like the yin yang symbol. We need the yin and the yang, and within the yin there's a bit of the yang, the anima and animus that Carl Jung talks about. So that brings that balance, because everything, one of the sort of like acronyms, is that the right word, within magic or the craft or esoteric teachings in the West anyway, is the above so below, as without so within. And this is how we see deity, is that yes, they are external and we are, so technically, a religion. A lot of loaded words these days, but it is a religion, because we believe in deity. They're not just energies or archetypes to us, they're actually deity like god, goddess, but they also reflect on a psychological level or pseudo-psychological level aspects within ourselves as well. So they form both sort of purposes, really. And some of the more modern teachings these days, there seems to be a rejection of religion or the religious aspect to it, just more focusing on the archetype or the energy. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying within my tradition, we are a set of fertility cult, a mystery cult, technically a religion as well. So it's taken me a little bit while to get used to speaking the word religion as well.
Yeah. But I guess too, it's reclaiming the religion, the actual term itself, to describe what it actually is, you know, and reclaiming it so that it has the meaning that it's supposed to have to start with.
It is, and I mean, lots of initiates that I know that I work with, or people that I say watch on social media channels or read about or discuss, and it can happen to other people as well. It's when we work with, we're tapping into an energy. We call it God, Goddess. Christians probably just call it God. I don't know. I've never been a Christian really. But it can manifest or appear to us in a way that cannot be truly explained. And I suppose in how we sort of assimilate that energy or that experience comes down to how we box it, how we picture it, how we perceive it. And within my tradition, I said we're sort of religious based. We believe in gods and goddesses. If I've got something forming, manifesting, whether in my mind's eye or even in the circle, and it's taking on a particular shape or energy, or I'm getting a feeling, a sensation of it, saying with a bow and arrow, and it's wearing, you know, a white sort of skirt, and there might be a hound or a deer next to it, I'm going to think that it's Artemis or Diana, because that's what I've always been sort of preconceived. And I've sort of shaped it in that way, and that energy, if it's got a message for me, and I suppose it's like working with spirits, it'll come in the way that it'll know that you can resonate and pick up on it.
Correct. Wow. So the Temple of Dark Moon, that's your working...
That's the coven's name.
That is the coven's name, And you were saying earlier that that's sort of in a rebuilding phase, and it's... Or is
yes, I think most covens, or a lot of covens, go ebbs and flows, and Temple of Dark Moon's been ebbing and flowing since its conception, basically back in the late 90s, and that's just the natural scheme of things. When I suppose as people grow and when mundane things get into the forefront, you know, when people go off and get married and have babies, or move because of work, and you know, we all are part of the real world as well. Not all of us are able to turn, say, our magical life into a money supporting venture. Some of us are lucky to do that, some of us aren't. I personally, I mean, I'd like to be able to spend more time in my occult studies and sort of focusing on that, but part of me also is of the opinion that maybe if I'm using my interest or something that I'm passionate about solely as a financial means, that might detract my passion from it. So I'd rather sort of separate my mundane sort of money, income, normal work away from my craft studies.
I think you're right. I do hear that observation from others who are able to, who have made their passion into their everyday income generation. And, you know, same for me, you know. And sometimes it can really rear its head as a chore. And then you go, crap, where's my passion? How do I get my passion back? Or do I only choose things that are going to generate income rather than this is a project I'm so desperate I want to do, but I'm not going to make anything from it, you know? Those are always questions. So, if you're able to keep your passion and...
I mean, there's sort of like a degree of envy for people who have succeeded in that area. It could come down to just the simple thing of the population that we have in Australia. As well. We don't have the wide populations that they do in, say, in other places like America or England, or where people can have very successfully set up occult businesses and the like. I know there are a few people here in Australia, but I sort of like being able to sort of turn on and off.
Yeah.
And as I'm getting older, I've sort of reassessed my sort of working arrangements, probably not as much as I would like to, but I'm getting there slowly. In that I sort of pick up more casual work these days. I'm not actually employed with I'm employed through an agency to do casual work, but even though my assignments are sort of at say 3 months blocks, I do try and take more time off than what I was doing before if I was just employed generally through an employer. And I think that's one thing that sort of surprises people when I say, well, I'm actually at work. I don't, and I don't know people who say they're a full-time reader, and the stress and the push to constantly be reading, I'll personally burn out. I find that even at markets that I do with my beading work, I watch some of the readers. I couldn't do that. I've done that on smaller markets, but I prefer to read say privately at my own place, like with my healings. I do them privately because it's just how I'm made up. So each to their own.
Absolutely, and each to their own in and I think people who read full time aren't literally reading 8 hours a day. It's just some may have busier days and then have days doing other things, but not necessarily working for someone else. But it's their main income. But definitely working at a fair or a market is definitely an intensive way to do it.
But doing anything, last weekend I had a double header, full Saturday, Sunday market. And I wasn't reading, I was just selling, but I was exhausted. I mean, I'm still exhausted from last weekend.
I'm not surprised. I saw the video of your setup. You look like you had 2 stands almost. You look like you had a little walkway in between the stands. Did you? Is that like, because you had, so on one sort of table setup, you seem to have all of your beautiful beading and products, and I think you had resins and mortar and vessels and all those sorts of things. Yeah. And then on the other stand, which was like the ta-da, there all your books were there. And I was like, oh, hang on a minute. Looks like she's got 2 stands. What's going on there? How are you going to handle that?
And that's all squashed into a 3x3 meter space.
Oh, right. And so you did it. Go on.
Yeah, we had we had bigger spaces, but I've got about 3 or 4 it takes me about 2 hours to set up, largely because a lot of the beading stuff I unpackage it and then you got to repackage. It took me about an hour and a half to pack up on the Sunday. So I was one of the last ones there. I usually am first one to arrive, last one to pack up, because I especially with probably some of the bigger products, I find it has to be sort of packed in the boxes very carefully so it can actually fit back into my car.
100%.
Otherwise, as you would know, going to around different markets, and if I've got a market the following weekend, and not all my markets are psychic fairs either, I have to be very sort of like careful as to what material or what goods I actually have on display. Even with the books, I don't take not all of the books to all of the fairs, because not all of some of them are just more like, there's one in particular that I love that's held at the end of most months, so I can't do it this month. It's actually held in an old church in what we call Clarence Park, and it's a beautiful little church. It's more sort of like a family atmosphere. But we've been in the church building, and I sort of just take my beading work.
Yeah, that's right. If you're interested in any books, you can have a look at my website. I
want a brown paper bag. I mean, I've had the odd one or two.
The under the table stuff.
Going to a few discussions, and I'm quite sure that the owner of the store, of the market, who organises it, really doesn't care. But I've gone by some of the, they used to have an op shop that the ladies would go to the op shops and they'll come for a wander through the market, and some of them would look mortified, with a big witchcraft sign, and I'm going, what, I'm just happy just to sit there and make my necklaces and my bracelets and save my witchy stuff more for a more psychic fair where you sort of expect it more.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the trick of being able to fit in, being comfortable with what you're working with, and being mindful about the people around you and your environment. And it's not necessary to be out there and out and proud. all the time. This doesn't diminish who you are at all. Yeah.
I've had, there's a few little hints, shall I say, like a little bit of incense, or I mean, I might have, the little book of Wicca on there, like as an introduction, and someone will go, oh, this is really interesting. Then I'll give them a card and say, well, wait, or I'll put it out front, underneath the desk, as well, here's my next book. Or I might just have the Sabbath book there, Dancing the Sacred Wheel.
Yeah.
And they'll say, oh, what's this about? And I say, well, earth-centric religion or spiritual belief systems, working with the, festivals and the sort of folklore in relation to the seasons. And, oh, really interesting. Oh, I might get this from my mum. I'm going, okay.
You do that.
Yeah, it's like good by way of educating somebody.
Yes, that's right. And wow.
Yeah.
So
it's really interesting. I like doing the markets, so you meet a lot of interesting people.
I absolutely. And you're testing the market at the same time to see what interests there are and what sorts of questions, because that would inform what you'd write next, wouldn't it? What are the sorts of questions people are commonly asking? Okay, so these are the concepts that people have a little bit of uncertainty about. Let's clear them up and make a publication about them, and then move them into something more in depth, like maybe the coursework or or a program, whatever. And help demystify some of the things that could put out by other people, but we're not touching on that.
Well, even within the sort of Wiccan pagan community, even in contemporary witchcraft, there's a section that I've included in there on the Wiccan read, because there's some of the interpretations of it. I sit there, wonder where they get that from. And that sort of has fed in and manifested in its own sort of folklore, in that these days Wiccans are perceived as all love and light and fluffy bunnies, and it's just that's one aspect. Could I trouble you to perhaps read out the contents, the table of contents of that book, please? Perfectly. That would give me a good idea of what's in it, and anyone who's watching, of course. Okay, so I've sort of divided it into two parts and also an appendix. The first is a background, and this is largely essays that I've written over the years. And then the second bit is sort of more practical. So you sort of like get a bit of an introduction of sort of the probably more commonly queried aspects of contemporary witchcraft. And I explain right from the beginning why I call it contemporary witchcraft, in that it's also been called, say, initiatory Wicca or initiatory witchcraft. I'm talking about sort of a form of witchcraft that can be traced back to Gardner. So it's initiatory witchcraft with an element of sort of modern Wicca in it. And the reason I don't like using the word Wicca, Gardner never used it, Alexander's never used it. It's a word that I suppose has been sort of mass use from, I suppose, Scott Cunningham may have been one of the first people actually, but he was never an initiate. So I'm sort of, and again, as I say, there's nothing wrong.
No, it's just clarifying it. Yeah.
It's just sort of, these days people see Wicca as this sort of fluffy, superficial, I don't know, crystal collection. And it's like, I'm hoping to maybe say, well, there's more to even, say, an eclectic form of Wicca, and we're sort of bringing it back to the very roots of Gardner, because if it wasn't for Gardner, there would be no witchcraft. End of story. He's the first one, whether you like him or not. He's the first one who went public about it, and really before Gardner went public, there really wasn't anybody calling themselves publicly a witch, apart from the Christian Church accusing people of witchcraft. So a lot of this actually is in love or hate him, really comes down to Gardner. So I'm sort of like saying, well, this is sort of Gardner's visions. If you are wanting to create a sort of a mystery tradition for yourself, something that has sort of a foundation and a spiritual sort of growth, because I also am a student of metaphysics, so I believe in the evolution of the soul. Here's some pointers, rather than just, say, look at my crystal collection, look, it's a full moon, let's make moon water and throw it everywhere. It's just like, okay, there's things that sort of like have blown out of all proportions, and people aren't really aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, so they're doing something without a real foundation in the significance of that particular activity, which means if without that understanding of that significance, the power isn't quite as strong as it could be too.
Yes, and it's sort of like turning sort of a passing fancy or a part-time interest into something a little bit more serious if you want to go that way. And that's why the subtitle is Foundational Practices for a Magical Life. And as I say, this book is sort of like, I'm giving you the ingredients, like the cement. Now get cement and concrete, the cement, the gravel, the water, and so you mix it together to make your cement, make your concrete, to pour your foundation for your house. I'm not telling you how you build your house or what shape you pour your concrete in. I'm giving you the foundations, that initial ingredient that will last, hopefully, throughout your practice as being a magical practitioner, and one that's aligned a little bit more with witchcraft. So I've got so back to the introduction. First part for the background starts off with a brief history of modern witchcraft. So I talk about how it came into being, and then I explain what contemporary witchcraft is and understanding contemporary witchcraft. And then some of the common beliefs are found within contemporary witchcraft, including the Wiccan read and the read of the Wicca. So there's actually two sort of passages there that these days are sort of being combined together. Then I've got an article about one's highest ideals, because that's actually form part of the Call of the Goddess, the Charge of the Goddess, that Doreen Valente wrote, was talking about striving for your highest ideals and what that highest ideals actually mean. And then the next essay, so the first section is largely essays, is contemporary witchcraft the right path for me? So it's turning the sort of question back onto the reader and saying, well, now's the time to sort of think about it. And then understanding and working with deity, because I said we are, say, technically a religion. Understanding the differences between the hemispheres, because there are at least 5 major differences between the northern and southern hemisphere. And this is again why, so I'm still rather surprised, but part of me is not. There's not still a lot of information, even on social media, about the southern hemisphere. We still are getting a large amount of information that's northern hemisphere. And what I'm really grateful about Moon Books is though I've got this sort of works for both hemispheres. I've put the southern hemisphere first.
I noticed that, yes. Yes, in the introductory one,
So we're not second-class citizens. It's like the northern hemisphere are, which is, I suppose, a bigger publisher. I understand why there's not a lot, because we don't have the population. At the end of the day, we don't have the population, and publishing houses are about unit sales at the end of the day. So,
and the books that have been written, especially like your introductory one, your first one, sorry, have been self-published. They've not been picked up by publishers, as you say. Anyway, back to your content. Sorry.
That's all right. And the last essay in that first section is the seasonal wheel of the year. So it's sort of like just sort of given a little bit, a snippet as to, so I've written a whole book.
How did you condense that into an essay?
So a whole nearly 300 pages on it. So again, it's just sort of touching on it a little bit more depth than I have in a little book of Wicca. And then the second part is now, okay, I've given you, all the ingredients that you need to make your concrete. Now, and this is how we mix them together, and you to start shaping your house to build it. So we talk about the importance of journaling. I have always been told to have a magical journal, magical diary. Mine, I've just got often are just a notebook, spiral-bound notebook. In my Etsy store, I sell beautiful, and I should have had one, beautiful leather journals.
I saw them in your video last weekend. Yes, they were gorgeous.
And I said, and you don't need anything fancy, because this is a magical journal. Is not your grimoire, your book of shadows. It's a recording of what you've done, your thoughts, your feelings. I work with the moon, what most of us do, And it's sort of something you can go back, just like keeping a normal diary, really, of your thoughts and what's worked, what hasn't, what did you do. So it's a record of your journey, which comes in handy later down the track.
Yeah.
So I talk about the importance of that. And then we get into meditation and visualization. Now, I find those are important because we have to we live in a very active world. A lot of us are on our iPhones probably more time than we would like to be on them, and our brain is very highly stimulated, so we need to calm that down, and we need to be able to hold a visualization. Otherwise, as I say in the book, how do you cast a circle if you can't visualize? If you're doing a healing spell, how can you visualize the person or where you want that energy to be sent to? You've got to be able to start training your mind and your faculties to be able to do that. So I give probably about 5 exercises from the pretty standard. You can find them, a lot of these elsewhere. The fourfold breath that's been taught within Buddhist teachings, yogic teachings. It's your standard one of sort of calming your physical self down and starting to clear the mind, to be able to bring the subconscious mind forward, as opposed to being forever in this sort of active conscious mind, being aware of your body, knowing what is actually you and what might be spirit or the gods coming through. So I find that's really important to understand. And then how to enhance your visualization abilities. And there's a game that we may have played when we were children called Kim's Game. This is one of the ones I think Lord Baden-Powell sort of invented or started with the Boy Scouts and guides and things like that, where you've got a tray and you put items on it and then you expose it and then you cover it up after a couple of seconds. And again, it's a simple technique, but it really helps our imagination and our visualization. So it's sort of an underestimated game that anybody can play, even a solitary can play. You can bring it back and have party games in your coven and things like that. And you could use your magical implements or tarot cards or oracle cards or crystals or anything like that on it. And again, that helps strengthen your visualization. Then I go into the next section is the magical power of the witch. And that, again, is a little bit different to energy, but it's South energy. It's like what it actually means to be a witch. When we talk about witch power, what exactly is that? An awakening sense. Again, there's exercises, being able to ground yourself, and then moving, sort of taking the first or the second lecture on meditation and visualization and bringing that through into this next section on heightening your visualization through, I call it a candle visualization. Then we're moving into the magic circle. Again, I'm sort of stepping you through sort of enhancing your own practice and how to cast a circle. Now, I'm just giving you ideas which you may or may not want to follow. It's entirely up to the individual. Breathing in cosmic energy, looking at the elemental placements. In my tradition in particular, the elements play a very strong aspect. I think they're the underpinning aspects of the universe, to be perfectly honest. Earth, air, fire, and water. Understanding where you place them and why you place them. And I give a few examples because even in Australia, there might be different placements depending on whether you have a stronger connection to where you are located within the continent. Where I am in South Australia, we're quite lucky because the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west. In the west we have the Gulf, so we've got a body of water there, so air and water don't need to be changed around. North of me is the equator, so that's our northerly winds are hot and our southerly winds are cold, so I just changed north and south around as opposed to the northern hemisphere traditions and directions. But if you live, say, on the eastern seaboard,
exactly. So where I live, I have water as the east and air as the west, because that's how that works. And then the other two, the sun in the north and earth in the south. Because our air currents move from the west across. But I know some people who live on the eastern seaboard who actually put earth
in the West, because that's the rest of the continent.
True.
And I'm going, okay, I can't remember what their reckoning is for the other placements, but at the end of the day, if you, as a solitary, it really doesn't matter as long as it makes sense to you.
And you're consistent with it and you're working with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the essence is knowing why. It's the most important thing. It's like calling yourself a witch or a Wiccan or a cultist or whatever. You can call yourself whatever you want to call it, but know why, know what your label is, know what your definition means to you.
Yeah.
If you just call yourself a witch because everybody else is and you've got some crystals, to someone else, that's not witchcraft. But if you know and you're comfortable wearing that label and say, you know, these crystals are important to my craft because, well, then it doesn't matter what anybody else says. And again, this comes down to your own witch power that is within yourself that no one can actually take away. So elemental placements, and then how to create your own sanctuary. That's sort of like a guided meditation, because we work a lot on the astral as well as the physical plane. So it's like sort of getting people that sort of a guided meditation or visualization or path working. So it's something that they could actually pre-record, Loretta could pre-record, and get into that, find themselves a safe space, which can also help in the physical plane too. If you're feeling that you're a little bit overwhelmed and you need to sort of like step out for 5 minutes to calm yourself, creating yourself a sanctuary that no one can get to is very beneficial. And then the next main subject is about the elements and the elementals. And we've got 4 exercises on what we call the pore breathing. And this is actually taken from an Austrian occultist, Franz Baden, who talks about really connecting with the elements and bringing that energy into yourself and identifying. And again, it comes back to the old occult principles, as above, so below, as without, so within. So really cementing yourself into your natural environment as well. Yes, witchcraft is a religion, but to me, it's also working with the land. And I find that really important. And it could be just an idealism, especially here in Australia and or other places in the Southern Hemisphere, because we are different to the Northern Hemisphere, and we have to, I think, remind ourselves why, and we need to really tap into our own energies.
Absolutely. And that's why I've promoted Australian books for so many years, is that the energy of our land really informs and infuses any work, any spiritual work that's done here. And it is completely different from the Northern Hemisphere.
And it's not just that, because Australia is home to one of the oldest, or I think the oldest living tradition still alive today. So we've got, and it doesn't matter if you are aware of Aboriginal cultures or not. Where I live, we're on Kaurna land. It's fantastic to see there's been a resurgence in the Kaurna teachings and culture in the last 10-15 years, because when I first came here in the early 90s, the Kaurna people had almost been decimated due to the colonialists with the smallpox that came down the river. So it's taken over 100 years, but they're really getting there, and it's really great to see. And it doesn't mean that I have to jump on board and learn Kaurna language, which maybe I'd like to one day. But it's that showing that respect,
acknowledgement and respect,
connection. And I think with all Indigenous people, I mean, we also have our Indigenous homeland somewhere along the line. Even doesn't matter for, like myself, mixed heritage, there is an Indigenous homeland, but we've just sort of almost forgotten. So connecting with where we are today, I think is very important. And if we are able to, or are lucky enough to look to our Indigenous brothers and sisters whose land that we're on, and maybe draw some inspiration or some to take a lead from their example, so to speak. And I know, especially in Australia with the issues, it's a very complicated subject. So
it is, absolutely, and it's fraught.
It's fraught. And even within the Indigenous cultures, there's some groups who are open to share, and there's some that aren't, and you just got to respect that. It's fair enough. It's like within Western occultism, my tradition in particular, we have sort of outer courts, which are open for anybody. We also have inner courts, which are not open. And it's the same thing. Any mystery cult throughout history has always been like that. You've got stuff for the non-initiates, for everybody, and then you've got stuff for the initiates only.
Freemasons are a wonderful example of that, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, back to your contents.
I think there's actually more secret organisations than people are really aware of.
That's because they're secret.
That's the whole point. So people say, oh, everything about Gardiner's or Alexander's stuff has been published. So what's the big secrecy? And said, what's being published is basically the tip of the iceberg. We're a mystery cult. The whole aspect of it is the mystery.
Yeah.
And you can't write about the mystery. It has to be experience. It's like connecting with space or to the land. It's really a deep personal experience for the individual and what it actually means to you. And I think this is probably what I'm hoping in my books is like I can give my experience, but hoping that someone else or the reader would pick up that and go, okay, and then go outside and see what the experience is for them, as opposed to go, okay, Francis or this author said this, so this must be it. And it's like, no, that's it to me. And then it could be it to me in this particular time and space. But tomorrow it might actually mean something completely different.
And that's the mystery.
That's the mystery. It always ebbs and flows, just like the moon, the energies around us. Okay, so so the elements and elementals, magical working tools, so it just gives a little bit of a basic understanding to that. Then we start talking about ritual, how to understand or undertake your first ritual and creating an astral temple. Then I go into the 4 powers of the Sphinx, which is also the witch's pyramid or the magus pyramid. So we're sort of moving now into, I suppose, spell casting, even though I don't actually talk much about spell casting in this book. Working with the moon, the exercise there is moon names, and this has recently came up on social media. What's the moon for March? Someone called it worm moon, and it's just like, well, no, these are folk names. We don't have the folk names here in Australia or the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's just like, make up your own. I usually do full moon for March. I usually call it a harvest moon because, it's the autumn equinox. But also where I live, which I'm close to the Barossa wine area, they are doing the harvest, which is the harvest of the grapes. So it's the same. Yeah. So it just works pretty perfectly that way. Then I go into little bits of using herbs, incenses, and colour, and you make a gree bag or a herbal bag. The art of psychic defence. Then I talk about spell casting and a little section on how to sort of combine all that for a magical life, as opposed to just having it as a hobby, but sort of starting to live it on a day-to-day basis. And then the appendix, I'll give an example of a circle casting ritual, talk about the elemental pentagrams, because I have a ceremonial background as well in high magic. We use the elemental pentagrams rather than just the banishing earth pentagrams. So I talk about them. There's a self-blessing, self-dedication ritual. I'll give a few, if you want to make a salt scrub or a ritual oil. I do my version of a rite that was in Paul Hewson's Mastering Witchcraft book that came out, I think, in the 70s. And he did one ritual, I think it's called Releasing the Witch's Power, or maybe that's my interpretation of it. But it's basically saying the Lord's Prayer backwards. And I find that's very confrontational to a lot of people, largely because we live in a Christian-based society. Or if you're coming from Christianity, we're also within, say, mainstream media, you say the Lord's Prayer backwards is what Satanists do. And technically, as he says in the book, that's what witchcraft is all about. Witchcraft is about the rebel. And what I liked about this ritual, why it's always sort of resonated with me, is that even if I said I wouldn't say that I was ever brought up a Christian. I think we went to church a few times and maybe Bible studies a few times in my youth, but I never had that indoctrination, thankfully. But we live in a Christian-based society, So we get this Christian influence regardless. We can't escape it. So as Paul Hewson says in his book, Mastering Witchcraft, excuse me, this rite helps break the chains that we may or may not be aware of from Christianity, because it is the big rebel thing, which is the essence of the witch. So it's actually a sign of freedom. And the very fact that if before you do it, you're getting these, oh, I don't know, that just sort of indicates or highlights how much of a subconscious attachment Christianity has. So to embrace the true power of the witch, and that's what the rite's called, you need to sort of free yourself. You can always grab those chains again if you wish.
But you're conscious about it then. They're not subconscious. Yeah.
And it's almost like taking off the rose-tinted glasses. And again, the whole thing to me about witchcraft is, when these sort of triggers come up, is to sit and go, oh, that's interesting. Why am I seeing that? Is that my trigger, or is that someone else's trigger that I've had adopted? And this is what this rite actually does. So I find that people go on about self-dedication or even self-initiation, which I don't believe that you can actually self-initiate. That's just my thing. But if you are truly interested in this path, you sort of want to clear yourself and start your foundation, because this is what the book's about. It's like setting your foundation. So you don't need to be or bringing over these Christian sort of hang-ups that you have. It frees you from all that. Which you're going to be able to put in more clearer space to move on. And then there's Making Your Robe, glossary, a little bit about me. Moon books. I did try to keep it very, very short. Moon books actually do endnotes, not footnotes. I personally, as a reader, find that frustrating, because you're reading something and there's a footnote.
You've got to flip to the back. Oh, right.
Page. Yeah, so I'm going, why can't it be a footnote? But that's how they do their books, so I'm not complaining. There's a bibliography about some of the books that, as you said, I've got a few. That have influenced me along the way.
I can just see you standing there going, that one, that one, that one.
Well,
I know it's more scientific than that, I'm sure.
I need to organise that, because I take them off because I do my research or something, and then someone distracts me, or I get another delivery from Amazon or book repository. I don't know how that happened, or someone else does something and someone else talks about this book, and next minute it's arriving on my doorstep, and it's I don't know how that happened, honestly. And then I should have shoved all the books back. Why I thought I'll do a clean up and I'll put the books back in, and now I can't find the books because the case over there is 2 books deep.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think I have a problem. So so that's what's packed into
that book. Wow.
250 pages. That includes the index, and then there's some other bits and bobs.
Wow.
So I think there's quite a lot.
Absolutely a really good foundation for either doing your own work or getting started, so that you're ready to
getting
do some
started
work.
And the follow-up when I get time, when I'm not distracted by other projects, so I've got about 5 billion things on the go, is to do the next step to that, because there is here's your information, and it's just like how I'm going to sort of approach that. I haven't quite decided, but I feel in what I've put in this book, there should be enough there for people to, even though I don't really cover spell work, I talk about the herbs and the candles. And there's an exercise making gree bags, because to me, spell work's very personal. But there's enough to start. So there's ritual outlines. Just start doing the foundational stuff and see how you go with it.
Cool. Well, I've really enjoyed. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed hearing all of that, and I'm going to get my order into you so I can get the books to come over here, because I just know that I'll get asked for it, because it's really foundational and practical, and that's what I want. I want to find, I want to be able to share out books that are practical and people can start doing their work and knowing why they're doing it in a context that they're living in, and that ticks all the boxes. So I'm so excited.
One of my very first books on the craft that I got was Vivian Crowley's, now it's had a number of names now, but I think it was Wicca, Old Religion and Modern Age. And I like that because she's a psychologist, Jungian psychologist, and she explained things, all that behind the scenes stuff, which these days a lot of the books don't talk about. But that's how my mind works. If I'm to draw a pentagram, I'd like to know why, how, where, and where did that came from. And I've always been like that. And so I'm hoping that, you know, when you cast your circle, you know, so it doesn't matter what hemisphere you're in or where you are, you know what you know the basics, so you can you tap into the energies and you can cast your circle away.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I'd like to finish now, if that's okay. And
I could waffle on for ages, Jo.
No, there's no waffling. I'm not getting the sense of waffling. But I made it another appointment and they've arrived.
It's fine.
I stuffed up to the time differences. I forgot all about our time difference, which is half an hour. So anyway.
That's good. I'm more than welcome to come back again.
Oh, that would be amazing. So let's leave this now as like a semicolon. To be continued, and let's set up another conversation where we can sort of go into some depth on something in particular if you want to. And I encourage anyone to leave any comments and questions.
Talking about the Dark Goddess.
Oh, I do. I have some questions about that. So Leah, let's do that. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Awesome.
Yeah,
I'll
definitely.
Get time to actually read more than the table of contents too. So Frances, thank you so much for sharing your time with me and our viewers as well. And shortly I will have your book available in our shop, so that'll be great. But in the meantime, if you're desperate, go straight to Frances and go and grab the book of yours. And I'll put those links in the, I was going to say show notes, but that's actually for podcasts, in the notes underneath the YouTube. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Fantastic, Jo. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
My
thank
pleasure.
you for stocking my books.
Oh, you're most welcome. Most welcome. Okay, I'll see you later.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.